Welcome to No Free Lunch, Africa's freshest business and tech podcast with me, your host, Greg Stewart. And we're going to look at the growing IT small business sector and the challenges many of these businesses have in ensuring they have sufficient funding to undertake larger ICT projects. And joining me in studio to discuss this is Andrew Keggie, who's the Chief Information Officer at Lula, the Cape Town-based fintech that provides digital working capital, funding and business banking solutions for South African SMEs. Welcome to No Free Lunch, Andrew.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, it's a really interesting topic, and overall there is certainly a mushroom in the ICT sector, it seems, that seems to grow every single year. But there's quite a big shift in the ICT sector, particularly with AI adoption, lots of companies doing new things. And I think that's driving fairly rapid growth in the IT consulting industry. New companies seem to be popping up every second day. Give us a bit of a perspective. You deal quite a bit with the industry. Give us a bit of perspective on how you see that IT industry and particularly the small business sector.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. We definitely are seeing growth in the ICT sector, and we're seeing the growth year on year. I think off the back of the investment into cloud computing, the fact that South Africa is one of the key destinations for the investment in cloud computing, and then off the back of that, investments in telecoms and investments into AI. I think this is all driving the growth in the sector. And we see that in particular in terms of the demand for funding from ICT SMEs. We've traveled a journey with funding ICT SMEs over the last 15 years. We've funded close to 1,000 ICT SMEs, and close to 980 million rand in capital that we've deployed. And we continue to see this demand for funding growing. So definitely positive signs in the sector, and I think a lot of opportunity for financial institutions to support the sector as it grows.
The numbers I have, in fact, indicate that according to the Information and Communication Technology, CETA, around about 31, almost 32,000 ICT companies, of which those, it's about 88% are smaller businesses. So that's quite a big chunk. It's about almost 29,000 small ICT companies. And as you say, that keeps growing. There's a lot of money in the sector, as you said, a lot of funding coming from overseas projects, international companies using South African-based companies for their projects. I think from a cost perspective, it's worth their while to do that. So there's definitely big movement there. However, the funding, as you mentioned, the funding is often a problem, isn't it? Smaller companies get a tender from either a large company and also from the government to do a project, and they don't necessarily have the staffing or the infrastructure to meet the demand for that project. Tell us about how that looks, and is that the normal situation, or have people got other alternatives? How do they actually address that funding gap and the staffing gap?
Yeah, Greg, I think this definitely is a challenge, in particular where you're winning a tender or a contract and you're needing to invest in those infrastructure, the licensing, the skills up front. It's having access to that capital at that point in time, which can be a challenge. I think that there are obviously traditional institutions that SMEs can go to for funding, but often the funding process is quite onerous. Often there's security required to access the capital, and it can just take a long time to access those funds. I think that's where the ICT SMEs are looking for flexible funding products. Yes. I think companies that can walk that journey with them and provide the capital as and when they need it to fund for those new projects. I think the other challenge is also, and we'll probably get onto it, is the factor of delayed payment, which I think is almost a bigger challenge. And that is keeping the lights on, keeping your business running, keeping the cash flow positive while you're working to execute on these contracts and tenders. We see both of those challenges for ICT SMEs. And really it's about finding that partner that can walk the journey with you. Make sure you have the capital to invest in the infrastructure and the skills, but also have the capital available to complement your working capital so that you can keep your business running while you focus on executing on those longer term initiatives, which hopefully bring in future revenue.
You have quite an interesting approach to funding in that there's fairly innovative thinking behind it. Lula doesn't charge any early settlement fees, as an example, and then the cash is available fairly immediately. How does Lula manage to do that? What do you guys do differently that enables you to do that sort of thing? That actually is quite a great benefit if an ICT company can come to you, and I think your loan amounts up to almost 20 million rand. So it's not insubstantial amounts. How do you get that authorized so quickly, and how do you allow for early payment if they do get payment early settlement without any penalties? How does that function?
So, Greg, that's just how we structure our products to make them more appealing to our customers. Our cash flow product effectively is a line of credit which is available to an SME, and they're able to draw down on that line of credit as and when they need the funds. And like you say, we don't charge any terms of early settlement fee. You only pay for the amount that you use, and they're flexible payment terms. So if you need to repay immediately, you can. And that's okay. And I think for us, the reason why we are so flexible with the product is because we're not looking for just a one-off engagement with our customers. We're looking to walk a journey. And there are quite a few examples where we've started out, with a company. I've got an example of an ICT SME that we financed in 2019, and we provided them with a facility of 750,000 Rand. And since then, we've increased that facility 7 times. And they're currently now sitting on a facility of 4 million Rand. So it just goes to show you how we like to walk that journey with our customers and grow with them as their businesses grow. And maybe just to correct you on the limits, our unsecured funding goes up to 5 million Rand in terms of the limits. We do provide some secured funding products for higher limits, but in terms of our cash flow product, it's up to 5 million Rand.
Okay. Even 5 million is a fairly substantial advance, particularly when you're not looking at necessarily holding any collateral against those loans. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier. I think one of the biggest pain points and not just in the ICT sector, in many sectors, is this late payment or extended payment requirements that often comes along with these tenders and contracts. It's inconceivable, actually, that something like a government department that is wanting a project done won't pay companies reasonably in a reasonable amount of time, and that these companies have to sit there without cash flow for months at a time waiting to get payment. Is that a major factor still? You mentioned it's a major factor, but how big a factor is that? And is that prevalent? And is it also prevalent in some of the contracts and tenders for larger companies still?
So, Greg, this is definitely a common challenge that SMEs face, and like you say, this is across sectors. I think the payment gap is kind of a well-known challenge, and we see this certainly with the SMEs that we fund. I think the ICT SMEs that are working with government, in particular CETA, face a particular challenge because you've got an intermediary that's essentially managing the release of those funds, and most SMEs will factor in a payment gap into their projections, whether that's a 60 or 90-day payment gap for funds coming in. But I think the challenge then is when that delay extends beyond that period that you've planned for. And I think that's where having access to flexible funding really, really does help in terms of that continuity. I think for ICT SMEs that are purely project-based, they're the ones that are at higher risk. So if they potentially don't have alternative revenue streams, whether it be a retainer for support services or whether it be a licensing stream of income, I think those project-based SMEs are particularly at risk. If you have alternative or additional revenue streams, that obviously provides a bit of a buffer to that working capital. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I think having access to funds as and when you need them just allows you to focus then on delivering on those longer term initiatives, which hopefully drive future revenue for your business.
And I find it particularly iniquitous that even large corporations also often have delayed payments, and cash flow for smaller businesses is a major thing. A lot of people who want to be an entrepreneur and want to start my own business, that often is the key factor in success or failure in a lot of SMEs, and that larger businesses should actually be almost funding their businesses through having extended payments situations with their suppliers. For me, it's just astounding. But it is something that businesses do have to plan for, and sadly so. And your company, you don't only deal with the ICT sector, you deal with other sectors as well. And it seems to be very commonplace. And certainly one would hope that going forward, these sort of things are addressed. I'm not quite sure how. Maybe there has to be an industry think tank around this to say, look, we want to grow businesses. Our unemployment figures just came out this week, and sadly, we've seen further unemployment in the marketplace. What we really need is more businesses. What we really need is more businesses growing and employing more people, growing skills. And yet, at the same time, there seems to be a punishment of these smaller companies and entrepreneurs who are risking everything to grow a company. And it just seems to me an unbalanced market situation that at some point in time surely needs to be addressed.
No, absolutely. Look, I think there are some fundamental challenges that need to be addressed. I think in the interim, though, it's how do we support the SME sector effectively? I think there's an opportunity really to support the growth, and that's kind of the role that we see ourselves playing in the market, is supporting the growth of SMEs. Our business was founded by entrepreneurs ultimately who saw this opportunity or this challenge in starting their own businesses with cash flow. And like you say, cash flow just it's a challenge across the board for all SMEs. Yeah, so it's about finding those partners that you can work through it, and hopefully over time the fundamental changes come into place to support the sector properly.
And then lastly, just talk to us a bit about the interest charges. Obviously, getting this kind of funding comes with an interest charge. How does Lula look to remain competitive from an interest point of view? Is there a range? How do you determine the interest charged on a loan? Talk to us a bit about how that is dealt with.
Sure. So Greg, we use live transactional data to calculate the company's business health at the point in time that we're providing them with funding. We are obviously operating in quite a high-risk sector of the market. It's probably the sector that the traditional banks are not necessarily willing to operate in. And I think we factor that into our credit models. We don't charge an interest fee per se, but there is a cost associated to the funding at the point in time. And we do have a concept of risk-based pricing. So depending on the credit model outputs, the health of the business, their affordability. That is how the charge is calculated. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have the flexibility in terms of repayment. So how companies pay that cost and capital off is flexible.
Long and the short of it is that it's worthwhile or worth the time for SMEs and particularly those in the ICT sector to calculate their costs up front and to utilize these kind of facilities wisely, but to ensure that they can actually deliver on projects and make sure it's on time and they've got sufficient staffing and they can keep their business boiling over. And it's certainly a facility that is required in the marketplace. So congratulations on providing something that the market needs. And as you say, with ongoing relationships being built with these companies, I'm sure that over time, some of those terms are adjusted to the advantage of the clients concerned. And but overall, it just keeps the industry ticking over.
No, absolutely, Greg. And look, we always say, I think the SMEs need to understand all the opportunities that are available to them. So absolutely go into the detail, understand the products, understand what's available, and make the most prudent decisions for your business at the point in time. But yes, we're always available to engage with SMEs, understand their businesses, and see how we can help them grow at the end of the day.
Well, Andrew Keggie, thank you for coming and sharing some of your knowledge with our audience on No Free Lunch. It's been great having you.
Greg, thanks so much.